Hey there everybody, Brad Geiger here with another episode of Webcomics Confidential, and today we're going to talk about a little bit different thing than we've been talking about. Today's going to be a tutorial. I've been doing a lot of pre-flight work for images for my upcoming books, and it occurred to me that it would be a good opportunity to talk about how to prepare your comics work so that it prints well in an offset or CMYK setting. So let's talk about some of the things we need to do, particularly with comics art, to get it to look good in print. So let's talk about pre-press. In preparing an image for CMYK printing, process printing, or offset printing, which are all basically the same way of saying the same thing, here's what I'm looking for in a processed full color file. I go to my layers right over here on the right hand side, and I want to see at least 3 layers. That floaty layer right there is for the highlights in their eyes, you see, so we'll label that highlight just so I know what it is for later. We can take that out of the equation. I want to see a line art layer, I want to see a trap layer, and then I want to see my colors, which can be done any one of a number of different ways. We might talk a little bit color a little bit later on. So I really don't care what's going on down here. The first thing I want to see is right up here is a CMYK signature. I want that to be CMYK. To double check it, I can go to my channels, and that says CMYK. It would say RGB if it was done in RGB mode. And if you're doing process printing, if you're doing CMYK printing, RGB is not going to work. Okay, so in some digital printing settings, they will accept an RGB file. But for CMYK, for offset, it needs to be CMYK printing. So that's the first thing I want to see is a CMYK signature over there. Now let's take those different layers part by part, and we'll turn them off so we can deal with them individually. Line art layer. Here's what I want to see for my line art layer. I want to go to channels, and I want to see nothing under cyan, magenta, and yellow. I don't want to see any pixels in those 3 channels. I want to see only pixels in the black area. So if I turn my black channel off, I should see no pixels. That is a properly prepared line art layer. Okay? So now we can turn it back on as CMYK, and we can turn that off. My trap layer is going to be, the lines are going to be slightly smaller, and I'll explain why, and they're going to have 3 inks in them, cyan, magenta, and yellow. All right, and I can come over to my channels, and I can confirm that that's true. All right, I've got cyan, magenta, yellow, and probably a little bit of black there. Little holdover. That's not a problem at all. In fact, I've seen some trap signatures that have a full black in there. We'll talk about trapping a little bit more in a moment. But the thing that I want to point out right now is that one thing I do for a quick check as I'm looking at this image to make sure it's ready for pre-press, I go over to my channels and I toggle black on and off. And it should look like that line is shrinking. Why? Well, it all has to do with a rich black. And that's what the trap layer is all about. So if I'm printing and I don't have this set up right, let's say I have my line art set up and I've got all of my different inks that are used to compose the image on that black layer. If I have that line art set up incorrectly and all of my inks are used to compose that black, I've got 100% cyan through there, 100% magenta, 100% yellow, and 100% white, black. If that prints out of register, if one of the printing press plates are just a little bit off, it's going to make my lines look fuzzy. So I want my line art to be just one ink, and that ink is black. The problem with that is black ink easily gets overpowered by the other 3 inks that sometimes play behind it. And if the only lines that are used to compose that image have black ink, you'll start to see the other inks showing through your black line. So you've got to make that a rich black. And that's what that trap is all about. So let's turn off line art and look at the trap. the trap is the same lines, only a little bit smaller, because again, the reason you make those lines smaller is that you give yourself a little wiggle room on the press. If that plate is a little bit off, it's not going to peek out from behind the black line art, but it's going to be enough that it's going to bolster that black line. It's going to give you a nice rich black with all four colors coming into play, and your black lines are going to look nice and dark. So that's why you want those to be a little bit thinner. And let's toggle that again just to show what I mean. There's my black lines. There's the trap behind it that's going to give me the rich black. But it's thinner so that if it is just a little bit out of register, no one's ever going to be bothered by it because it'll still be behind the black. Okay? That's what a good trap is all about. Now, for you can use any number of combinations for a trap. The one that I see quite a bit is 60% cyan, 40% magenta, 40% yellow. I use a 0% black since I've got a black line above it. You could also, I've seen a few people who use 100% black, and they make that rich black a full black. So their trap layer might look a little something like this. All right, you see how that jumped up. That's not a great way to do it, but just to kind of show you what that layer would look like. Mine, I usually use 60-40-40, 70, 60-50. I use cyan, magenta, and yellow. The important thing is that you get the different inks back there bolstering that black. Okay, so that's what I want a pre-press CMYK to look like. A line art that has only black. That's how I confirm that. A trap layer that is slightly smaller, slightly condensed from the line art, and I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. And of course, color. And I want everything to be CMYK. That's what I'm looking for when I'm doing a pre-press run on my images before they go to the printer. Now, let's talk about how to get that the way we want it. Let's come over to this over here, and let's pretend I'm dealing with this from the very start. So I've got my line art, I've got another highlight layer there, and here's my line art. So the first thing I'm going to do is confirm that it's CMYK. There's the first thing, the first hurdle we have filled. Now let's go to my channels and see what that black looks like. And already I see I might have a problem here because that line isn't shrinking, is it? Yeah, if that's even a little bit of out of registration, you're going to see that line start to get real fuzzy. You have to just trust me on it. Or you know what you do if you don't believe me? Pick up a newspaper, if you can find one. Pick up a newspaper and look closely at the images. Newspapers are run incredibly quickly, incredibly cheaply, and you can often find out-of-register images in your daily newspaper. Because it's almost impossible to expect them to have 100% sharp registration. So already I see I've got a problem. I need a trap layer. And so I go over here to my layers and I see indeed I don't have a trap layer. In fact, if I turn these other layers off, I'm going to probably see, look at this. My line art layer has not been prepared correctly. It's got all of the inks in it. Okay? And that's going to be that if I'm just even a little bit out of registration, I'm going to be in trouble. So how do I fix that? Okay, now I've done this wrong. I've done this wrong 100 different ways. Here's what you don't do. Don't just delete cyan, magenta, yellow and leave black. That will degrade your image. All right, I'll show you. Here, let's get rid of cyan, magenta, yellow, and just leave black, and you will see how chewy that image is. That's because I got rid of a lot of important pixels. Let's do an undo. See how I'm building that back up? See how that, and you could play the video back if you want to see it again, but I lost a lot of important pixels that way, didn't I? So let's go back up to my CMYK layer, and I'm going to do a select all, and I'm going to copy. Now I'm going to delete the cyan layer. And by the way, make sure you've got white for your background color because you don't want to put color in there. You want that to be white. Select magenta, delete, make sure white is your background color. Yellow, delete. Black, delete. Now, paste. Now you've taken all of those pixels that was used in the composite and you put them all on the black layer. You can turn your CMYK back on and we can go back now and look, and you'll see, obviously, if we toggle black, everything disappears. That's what we want in a black line art layer. That is only black ink used to make all of those fine little lines. It's going to keep those fine lines from getting fuzzy when it's printed. But we need a trap layer, or else those dark lines are going to show color from behind it, and it's going to look kind of crappy. It's easy to do. Select any of your black, and then come up to select, pull down to similar. That's going to catch all of the black pixels. Now, I go to modify, and I usually contract 2 pixels. I've seen people contract it just 1 pixel, and that's fine too. It depends on how much of a daredevil you are. I contract it 2. 1 pixel is just fine. Now you create a new layer over here in your layers palette, and I call that trap. And I'm going to let it sit above just for showing you, but usually I'd put the trap layer behind the line art layer. Now I come over to my rich black, and just to kind of show you, I'm going to take that black ink out and just use a trap color of 60% cyan, 40% magenta, 40% yellow, 0% black. We use K for blacks because in the printing industry, they didn't want to confuse B black with B blue. So that's why they say cyan, which is a C, magenta, yellow, and black is denoted with a K. So now over here, I've got my fill ready. It's 60, 40, 40. Get my paint bucket and dump it. And I can deselect, and I can see that my trap layer is just a little bit smaller, a little bit contracted from the line art area. Come over here to layers, put that trap right behind the line art, turn the colors on, the highlights and the colors. And now when I toggle my channels on and off, and just by turning the black layer on and off, I can confirm that I've got that trap layer set just right. So now I've got this is ready to go. It's CMYK. My black lines are designated just to the black ink, and I've got a nice rich black ink behind that that's a little bit smaller than the line art lines, so that if that prints a little out of registration, I'm still okay, and I still get my nice rich blacks. That is ready to go. I want to show you how to deal with one problem that sometimes comes up. You take a look at your layers, you see you don't have a trap layer. We've only got a line art layer and a color layer and a little highlight layer there, so we've got no trap. And we see that the blacks are made up, the black ink, the black lines are made up of stuff that's on all 3 plates. Let's turn our color off so we can easily see that. And we go to channels, and we see that the cyan, magenta, yellow all have pixels. We don't want that. That's going to print fuzzy. And take a look at the line art layer. It seems like a great idea. It's got no pixels back here other than black. It just has black pixels on a transparent background. Seems like a great idea. It's really not. So when you see a line art layer that has that transparent background, I'm going to show you how to fix it in case that starts to give you problems. Let's go back to that original line art layer, and we'll select it, make sure all of our channels are turned on so we got all those pixels that we want. Select it and copy it. Now I'm going to select a new layer, and I'll call that layer 8, and I'm going to fill that with white. Okay, get that paint bucket, put it behind the line art layer. Now, making sure that the line art is turned to darken, I am going to merge down, and now I've got a line art layer that's set with both black and white pixels. I'm going to want to turn that either to darken or multiply so that my colors can show through. See if I don't do that. If I have that set to normal, I won't see my colors. So I've got to have that line art set to either darken or multiply. Now, let's turn that off again. We got to set up a trap. Now it's the same situation as we had before. Select any of those black pixels. Go to similar. come down to modify and contract. We'll contract it by 2, come up with a new layer, call it trap, fill that with our trap blue, put it behind the layer. So now we've got line art, trap, and color. We turn our color on. Now we're going to have a CMYK document that's ready to print. And I can confirm it by getting up close to it and toggling that black, and I'll see those lines appear to shrink a little bit and see that they're just blue. And good, that doesn't have any white showing through there. That makes me feel a lot more comfortable. And I'm ready to call that good. That's my process for pre-press, pre-flight checks for any images that I'm going to print in CMYK. Just as a quick review, I want to see line art. I want that line art to be on a separate layer, and I want the ink to all of the pixels to be just on the black channel. That's my line art. I want to see a trap layer. That's also best kept to a separate layer on its own. That's going to be a condensed version of the line. That line is going to be smaller, thinner, contracted from the official line that's on the line art layer, and that's going to have 3 inks on it, cyan, magenta, and yellow, 60%, 40%, 40% respectively. I have seen some people use an extra layer right there of 100% cyan, 100% black. If that's what you want to do, that's fine too. I don't see any problem either way, quite frankly. And of course, all your colors on a separate layer, and you can do that any one of 100 different ways. As long as it's CMYK, you are ready to go to press. And there you have it, pre-flight for images for comics reproduction. Now, a quick footnote. That third example I showed you, I couldn't get it to reproduce while I was taping, but I did want you to have that tool in your tool belt, as it were. Sometimes when I have a line art layer that has a transparent background, when I designate all of the pixels to that black channel, sometimes the lines jump on me a little bit. They get offset. And the quick fix that I've designed for that is to put a white background, crunch them down, and now you've got black and white pixels, and it keeps the image from jolting on me. So that's the only reason I did that, in case that left you a little bit confused. This is Brad Geiger once again for Webcomics Confidential, and we'll see you next time.